So in this video, primarily what I want to do is just focus in on Daniel as what's sometimes called apocalyptic literature, and give just a little bit about the kind of background or the setting, what has happened behind Daniel having been composed. So first of all, Daniel is apocalyptic literature. So the word apocalypse basically comes from a Greek word that just means a revelation. And so this term is used to describe literature where the author expresses the idea that they have received a revelation, usually a revelation from some heavenly being, some other worldly being, usually about what God's will is or what God is planning to do. So um, in the New Testament, we have a book called the Book of Revelation, and this is an apocalypse. It's the apocalypse of John. So apocalyptic literature, so when you look at the range of material that the scholars will refer to as apocalyptic literature, they notice several characteristics about these books. And, there is some debate about using this designation, that sometimes that things get called apocalyptic literature that may not, for other scholars, would not want to include. And they sometimes think that text or literature are not included that should be included. But generally speaking, when we talk about apocalyptic literature, Jewish and Christian apocalyptic literature, there are several characteristics. One, we usually have what we call a seer. So the seer is the person with a vision, and they report their vision in the first person voice. So I saw, I did this, this, happened to me. So a seer. A characteristic of a lot of apocalyptic literature is pseudonymity. In other words, so the person who has authored it is representing themselves as a different person. So that's why we have things like the Apocalypse of Abraham, or the Apocalypse of Baruch, or you might have something written as being presented as coming from Peter, but wasn't by Peter. Now, it's not always clear that it's always an example. There was always pseudonymity. So, for instance, in the New Testament, the book of Revelation comes from a person by the name of John. Now, if the author is wanting us to think that it is the Apostle John, well, then this may be an example of pseudonymity. But it isn't clear that the author of the book of Revelation sees himself as belonging to the apostles. In fact, one part of Revelation, he seems to see the apostles as being a part of a foundation that's already been laid, and presents himself more as a prophet. So if it's just an anonymous John who's a prophet, then this is not an example of pseudonymity. But pseudonymity is a frequent characteristic of the Jewish and Christian apocalyptic material. There's oftentimes coded language, so that there are symbols and numbers that stand or represent something else. And so this invites the audience to make sense of the symbols and the numbers. And when they see these things or hear these things, they probably have a context in which they are able to interpret them. There are oftentimes celestial intermediaries, so things like angels and demons who come and, either you're seeing these things take place, they're seeing the activities of angels and demons, or sometimes angels come and speak. There's usually a culmination of history ending, not for all apocalyptic literature, but for a lot. So we're seeing something about God's plan, God's will, eventually where good is going to triumph over evil. So who composes apocalyptic literature? Well, this is an area of some debate, but by and large is oftentimes seen as something that is composed by, we can say, the powerless or the vulnerable. Usually the people who compose apocalyptic literature see things happening in the world in which the righteous, or what the author of the apocalypse see as the righteous, are going to be persecuted or harassed or go through a period of suffering, usually at the hands of very powerful entities, either governments or those connected to the government. And so the encouragement oftentimes is for the righteous to have resistance or to have perseverance, to patience, hope. Now, it doesn't mean that the author doesn't come from like an elite community, because obviously the person can write. And so writing is a skill, and it is a skill that usually is something only people who have gone through some kind of education have gotten. Usually education was expensive. And so a person who writes an apocalypse probably belongs to a group of people who have been exposed to the ability to write and to compose these things. Nevertheless, they see themselves and they see those that they're writing to belonging to this kind of powerless or vulnerable group, and who are needing this kind of message, this encouragement to stay faithful to God before the end will arrive, and wherefore good will finally triumph over evil. Now, when it comes to the book of Daniel, so I see Daniel as apocalyptic literature. So it doesn't, it has lots of features in it that are like other apocalyptic literature, and it also has some features that, some apocalyptic literature or many apocalyptic don't have. So in particular, we have these kind of court tales at the beginning, which makes it kind of unique. But we can tell from the apocalyptic material that's inside Revelation that certain things have taken place. So certain events have recently taken place that makes it look that like evil looks invincible. So here is an example of an apocalyptic literature written for people who, what they see happening in the world, evil is kind of taken over, evil powers, evil people. So the most important thing that has taken place is Antiochus Epiphanes is ruling. So he's one of the Seleucid rulers. He comes to power through, a set of differing circumstances, but eventually comes to power for the Seleucid Empire, basically for Syria, at about 175 BCE. Then Antiochus has been replacing the Jewish high priest who will enrich him. So this is something that is beginning to happen that causes some concerns, particularly among the priesthood, that instead of people becoming priests who are a part of a line of high priests, now there are people who are being appointed as high priest because they have promised Antiochus a certain amount of money and an allegiance towards his agendas in the area. And so there does seem to be some tensions amongst the priesthood about what is kind of taking place. So first, he was replacing Onias III with his brother Jason. So that took place because Jason promised Antiochus collecting taxes or collecting money. Then, later on, he ends up replacing Jason with another guy by the name of Menelaus. So, again, Antiochus switches his allegiances to whoever is going to pay him more money. Then, Menelaus assassinates Onias III around 171 BC. So, one high priest ends up killing a former high priest. So things are gotten really bad in a very short period of time with around the temple, which is basically becoming the kind of the administrative stronghold of the region. So Antiochus successfully attacks Egypt, and then he's going to end up robbing the temple around 169 BCE. Although Antiochus is going to be prevented by Rome from going farther into Egypt as he would want to. He's going to attack Egypt again, but in this time he's going to be rebuffed by Rome. And so there's this story that Josephus tells about basically a representative of Rome comes and meets Antiochus out in the desert before he gets ready to go into Egypt, and draws a circle around him and basically warns him if he steps out of that circle in the direction of Egypt, he'll also have to answer to Rome. So Antiochus can't, go after Egypt and have enough of an army to also defend his empire against Rome. So he realizes he has to back off, which puts him in a very bad mood, and ends up he's going to be having to go back through Palestine, and so he's in a bad mood. He didn't get all that he wanted in Egypt. So what he does is he sends mercenaries into Jerusalem to kill conspirators. So when all these things have been going on in the temple area, there have been people who are very annoyed with Antiochus and really don't want Antiochus ruling over them. He's an example of a very evil ruler. And so they are trying to figure out ways of breaking free from Antiochus. Well, so he sends these mercenaries in Jerusalem. They kill these conspirators. He builds a citadel, the citadel Acra, and it's overlooking the temple. And so this is his exertion into the area. So we'll leave it with there right now with his activity. So at the time that Daniel is written, these things have already kind of taken place. And so you have the presence of a citadel overlooking the temple that this evil ruler has it put in place, and it's like he's putting a squeeze, a grip. And during this time, we're also going to see the rise of the Hasmonean family, and there may be some hints that Daniel is aware, the book of Daniel is aware of the Hasmoneans' resistance to Antiochus, but Antiochus is still around. So we don't have really the cleansing of the temple being recognized in Antiochus. We don't see what the Hasmoneans end up doing, or the Maccabees end up doing with the temple being reflected in Daniel. So it seems as if that event hasn't taken place, but these other ones have, and so that is what is taken, and that seems to be kind of the context for which the revelation or the composition of the book has been composed. So we'll leave it with that. It's just some about the genre of Revelation and the background for the occasion of its writing.